The Holy Gospel this morning comes from St. Mark in the 8th chapter. So then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." So he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? And those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. Well, there is, of course, in my day, one major question that every young boy, somewhere between 10, 11, 12, had to go through. And this was a question that was posed to every young man. Now, I'm hoping that as our society has released its death grip on patriarchy and gender roles and things like that, that also women will be involved in this question going forward, if they haven't already, because the question is so vital to our life together as people, so that all of us, whether we are male or female, should be able to ask this simple question. The question is simply this: you going to be a Ford guy or a Chevy guy? Now, back in my day, it was the 70s. There were also a few people who were Dodge people, but they were mostly addicted to Dukes of Hazzard, and they didn't count. And I only say this because I was spending some time with my neighbor. We were going golfing last week, and we had this long drive to the golf course. And so he always drives Fords. All 14 years that I've known him. And I said, "Dave, why do you always drive Fords?" Because I'm a Chevy guy. We had Trans Ams and Camaros, and I still got one in the garage. So there it is. But he said, "Well, there's a story behind this guy." Now, he's 82 years old. And Dave was telling me that when he fought in the Korean War, and when he was in the Korean War, he came back, and the United States Congress passed a GI Bill for the people who had fought in the Korean War that they could receive financial aid to go to college. And that was all good and well, except the state of Michigan voted not to accept the GI Bill. And so they didn't have that money coming to their folks who had come from the state of Michigan to fight in the Korean War. So there was going to be no money for them to go to college. And so Dave, who was from Michigan, right outside of Detroit actually, had resigned himself then to not go to college when he came back from Korea, even though many of the people that he had served with in that war were going to college because they came from states like Wisconsin, Indiana, California, and other places that have accepted the GI Bill. So he was at home and kind of depressed because he really wanted to go to college. He thought there was a lot of stuff he could do, but he just couldn't afford it. And then Henry Ford II, this being the son of Henry Ford, the guy who made Ford Motor Company, heard that this is what Michigan had done, and so he donated a free 4-year scholarship to every service person from the state of Michigan who had served in the Korean War so that they could go to college to any state college in Michigan. And so Dave received one of those scholarships from Henry Ford II and was indeed able to go to college, became an electrical engineer, and now has been since retired and living next door to me and my mom for, like I said, the last 14 years, golfing all the time. But what Dave did, he was so impressed with Henry Ford II, he said, "So here's what happened, Scott." He said, "So I wrote him a letter thanking him. Now, I know Henry Ford II, he said, I know he didn't read that letter, and I know he doesn't know anything about him. But in that letter, I said, thank you very much. Thank you for this gift that you have given me, and I hope to be able to use it to better our world and our society. And I can't pay you back for 4 years of college at Eastern Michigan, but I can make this promise to you that I will buy a Ford product for the rest of my life. And indeed, Dave told me, he's been buying Fords ever since he came back from Korea. He's bought Fords for himself, bought Fords for his wife, his kids, his grandkids. I mean, he's been buying Fords for almost, 65, 70 years. And I told him, I laughed, I said, so you bought Fords in the 70s? Now I got to tell you, Ford makes some great products. Nothing better than a Mustang, right, Chris? Shelby's as good as it gets. But in the 70s, Ford had a problem. They made these cars, for example, in the 70s called the Ford Granada. These may have been the single cheapest cars ever produced in the United States of America. In fact, they were so bad that my dad one time took in 2 Granadas, a white one and a green one, for a washing machine and a dryer. And so my mom and I had to drive these Granadas. And they would fall apart. You would just drive down the road and you'd lose a piece. They never started, they never worked. The seats always broke, so the minute the door opened, the seat went flat. It looked like a futon. And it was so bad. And my mom got so frustrated that she was just driving down the road one day and it stopped. She pulled it off to the side of the road, walked to work, called up my dad and said, you can come pick up your car if you want, but I'm never driving it again. And as far as I know, that car is still there. It's a planter on the side of the road for the last 45 years. These cars were horrible. So I said to Dave, I said, you bought Fords in the 70s? He said, I sure did. He said, driving a Mercury now, or Lincoln. And I was like, well, there's an upgrade. But it was so impressive. And he can rattle off all the cars. He's bought 27 Fords for his family over the last 65 years. And I got to thinking about that when I was looking at this story about Jesus who says, take up your cross and follow me. But even more importantly, he says, those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake, for the sake of the gospel, will inherit the kingdom. Because what happens is that sometimes we think that this kind of taking up your cross is a once-in-a-lifetime deal. But what I heard from Dave and his constant understanding of his relationship with Fords is that this is a relationship that's bonded for life. And Henry Ford II and all the Fords after him have no idea that there's this guy who's just buying Fords because their great-grandfather or grandfather or whatever relation they have to Henry Ford II once gave a donation to a bunch of servicemen so they could go to college. But Dave understands it. And it's that constant, year-in, daily reminder every time he turns on a key or pushes a button to get his car going that he had made a commitment and he was sticking to it. Nobody was forcing him to. His wife wasn't forcing him to. In fact, she wants a Lexus. His kids are like, you've got to be kidding me. And if any of them were like me and had to drive one of those Granadas, they were probably thinking about getting new parents. But nonetheless, we live in this understanding that when we make a commitment, we follow it through. And what Jesus is talking about to his disciples is that when one picks up the cross and follows me, one is making not only a commitment on this day, but every day going forward. And if you see your life then as sort of this is what you got and you got to hoard it, you've missed the point. Because we live in a world where God's grace continually pours into us so that we can share it. We can lose it. The point of our life is to lose it, to give it away. The point of our life is not to hoard it and save it. The point of our life is to lose it, to take everything that you've been given and give it away so that because we understand God will give you more. The grace of God continually overflows and pours out. And Jesus does not want us to be a lot of hoarders who kind of take our little stuff and hide somewhere in hopes that no one finds it. But rather to understand that in taking the cross, one is making a commitment to God, to live in this life that God has given us in this grace-filled moment in which we can continually pour out our lives. So, for example, our friends here from Table Grace. Now, you want to start a food truck ministry, I'm understanding. Ford or a Chevy. Fundraising gets a little tougher all of a sudden, doesn't it? By the way, two Ford people after the service last night said, my gosh, Scott, I usually like you. So it is one of those things. But understand that something like Table Grace, right? And this new ministry that they're trying to do, they're trying to lose it. They're trying to get rid of it. We want to end hunger. We want to end poverty. We don't want to just kind of keep it going so that we got something to do on Thursday afternoon. And so they continually give away. And so people like Matt and Simone and all the others, you who are sitting in this pew, to lose your life for the sake of the gospel is the great gift that we have. And to be able to support them and help them buy a truck, if we could raise a couple $1,000s this day out there over the course of this time would be great. They could at least look at a Chevy. So that we can find a way to lose our lives. And in the midst of the ministry that they do and all others, we can find ways to continually move forward and be the beacon and the hope that God has asked us to be here at First Lutheran. To be a place that loses its life, loses everything for the grace and glory of God. And so we live from that promise. To be able to go out through these doors and try to lose our lives. And there are hundreds of ways to do it. You can donate. You can go serve food. You can help somebody. You can pick up all those people who are walking because their Ford broke down. Whatever it may be, we live with this promise that going through those doors, the more you lose your life, the more you will receive. And in the end, when you look back and have lost everything, you will then find the greatest life you've ever known. The life that comes eternally with God through the power of the Holy Spirit in the cross of Jesus Christ. Amen. Let us stand and sing.